Thanks, Paul.
Your clicker.
I have the clicker. Thank you so much, Paul. Appreciate the kind introduction. It is great to be here, IRL, with all of you, and it's great to be with all of you virtually. Excuse me, I'm going to go back. And it's great to be with my panelists. I mean, panelist feels like not the right word for these
fellow stars.
Fellow stars. For these two individuals. I was going to say writer, thinker, creator, visionary. I was going to go there. Yeah.
Oh, here we go. And we're off.
But I'm going to do the official formal introduction in just a moment. But I did want to say that it is thrilling to be here for sure today. One of the things that's I think I just wanted to note, I mean, this whole conference is about provoke, and I hope that the discussion that we're going to have is going to be true to the raison d'etre of the conference that Paul and Arun built so many years ago, because we are going to be, I hope, one part provocation, one part exploration, and then maybe 10 parts mobilization. That's really the end game. So, all right. The topic is media equity, as Paul said. The question, and it's a big one, you see it before you hear, what if we'd had media equity in our past? Would our history be history? So that's going to be the question we're going to get to. So hold on. But first, the formal introductions, as promised. I'm Gail Hyman, as Paul said, CEO of Weber Shandwick. We're proud that we work at the intersection of technology and media and culture. And society and media for sure, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Can't say enough that the importance of a free media and the importance of an equitable media in preserving democracy. So that's why this conversation is so important. I'm going to go over and introduce Baratunde, and I was super scared because in your book, How to Be Black, you talk about how you kind of listen to how people pronounce your name, and marvel at the different ways they pronounce your name. So I was pretty afraid of messing that up.
You're doing great.
Okay, so far so good. So Baratunde Thurston, Emmy-nominated multi-platform storyteller and producer. Hang on, you too are operating at the intersections of race, technology, democracy, and climate. The host of the PBS television series America Outdoors with Baratunde Thurston, creator and host of How to Citizen with Baratunde, which Apple named, hang on, one of its favorite podcasts of 2020, and a founding partner of a new media startup, Puck. Comedic memoir, How to Be Black, and I am not here to sell either Baratunde's books or Bonan's, but this is a great book. Bonan's yours.
I'm here to sell it. We're here to
sell. We're here to sell. You don't have to.
Here to sell. And it was a New York Times bestseller, even without this promotion right here on the stage. In 2019, Baratunde delivered what MSNBC called one of the greatest TED Talks of all time, which is also watch that, and it's fantastic. You say that you're unique in your ability to integrate and synthesize themes of race, culture, politics, and technology. True. You're on the boards of Build.org and the Brooklyn Public Library and live in Los Angeles, California, but grew up right here.
In
correct?
Washington, D.C. proper.
So welcome, Baratunde, and thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Gail.
Okay. B. Bonan Bao. Co-founder and chief strategy officer at Group Black, a client of Weber Shandwick, I should note, and co-founder of Lockstep Ventures. Bonan's work is focused on transforming the face of investment and media ownership through commitment to diversity and inclusion. Bonan, one of the foremost awarded marketing executives in the industry, true youngest C-suite executive at a Fortune 50 company, worked for CPG brands that all of us know, right, including Mondelez and PepsiCo, and been responsible for organizational transformations at brands, again, like Oreo, Cadbury's, Gatorade, and Frito-Lay. So thank you, Bonan, for that.
You're welcome.
Thanks for the Fritos.
All the healthy.
Thanks for the Fritos on me.
Right.
It's been inducted into the Advertising Hall of Achievement and can be found, hang on just about every list that is kept, such as Fortune's 40 Under 40, Fast Company's 100 Most Creative People in Business, Ebony's Power 100, the Internationalist of the Year. Were you aware of that one? I was not. Also an author, like Baratunde, and a CNBC television host. And I must say, Bonan has also been my colleague and a man from whom I've learned a great deal. So thank you, Bonan, for that.
I don't know about colleague.
Colleague.
You were
for
my
sure.
boss. So. just to be very clear.
Welcome to Provoke.
All right. right. We are all peers here. So let's get back to the big question that we put out there. What if we'd had media equity in our past? Would our history be history? I thought we'd just go through a little bit of history, and I must say, and this is American history for those listening from around the world, and it's an inglorious history, I might say, but let's go through it as to sort of ground our conversation. So we'll go back to the year 1896. And a guy named Homer Plessy. Homer Plessy tried to get into or tried to sit in a part of a train that was labeled whites only. To make a long story short, he was arrested for that. The case went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that there would be segregation and it would be separate but equal, was that piece of legislation in 1896. So you think, okay, what if there had been an equitable media? How would that story be covered? Would Homer Plessy be a hero? Would he be a freedom fighter? But at that time, the answer was no. Some 100 years later, one of Jay-Z's album cover artists did do a tribute to Homer Plessy. This is in New Orleans. And so you think here an homage to Homer Plessy. But the way, at the time, no coverage that drove him to freedom fighter or hero. So now we go to 1926. And a community, at the time it was one of the most prosperous, or the most prosperous black community in the country, dubbed Black Wall Street. It was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And there was an incident in that community, a small incident, which catalyzed 3 days of violence against that community. 100 people were killed. I believe close to 200 businesses were destroyed. 10,000 people were scarred and impoverished as a result. So what if the media at that time were equitable, covered that differently, and thought about the community in Tulsa and celebrated the fact that it's a thriving, fantastic community? What would that have done to that story? What would that have done to those 3 days? Would those 3 days of violence have happened? Go to one more in our past, the year 1954. Many of you may be familiar with this, Brown versus the Board of Education, and a ruling on segregation. The ruling was to desegregate the schools. So repealing the ruling, the Homer Plessy ruling. That was the separate but equal segregation ruling. So here was a ruling around repealing. So here, the media, again, what if the media had celebrated this as what is right for all of our children? In fact, they did not, and you can see how people took to the streets to protest the desegregation legislation. So here, again, what if there'd been an equitable media? Would all of this have been covered differently? We go to the present and take a look at content. And here, if you look, all the sitcoms that many of us in this room and beyond this room have grown up with, the sea of white faces and sitcoms. And yes, there are sitcoms, and you can go to the bottom, and with black casts. But for the most part, we have grown up with a sea of white in sitcoms. Go more to the present, and the world of sci-fi, from Star Wars to Harry Potter. You get white faces for sure. And again, what would that be if there were equitability? We'll talk about ownership of content making, talk about equitability in production and direction. What would all of these look like? Even now, interestingly, when we have Black Panther and other movies like that, which are doing exceedingly well, you look at how the media covers, and the media covers as woke. So the power of the media and all these, I think, is incredibly important. So that's why we're having this discussion today. So, all right, I want to kick in to answer this question, but first I want to open with a little bit and give Baratunde and Bon a little bit of an opportunity to tell your story and how you got to be impassioned about issues of equity.
Hello.
Hello.
Raise your hand if you're staying in this hotel. Okay, great. So I just want to acknowledge, and first of all, the starry ceiling. I feel like a baby. This is beautiful in here. And the check-in desk, there's something weird about the background wall that scrambled my brain in concert with the pattern on the receptionist. Am I alone? Thank you. I just needed one other person to validate that I'm not losing my mind. It's a weird malware thing that they've gotten inside of my soul. I was born in '77 here in Washington, D.C. My mother, Arnita Lorraine Thurston, my father, Arnold Robinson. My father was killed when I was a young child, shooting, early gun violence, a story we know very often. My mother never graduated from college. yet became a computer programmer for the US government. And I grew up in a version of DC that we don't see on the television, not the left-right, Democrats versus Republicans, power center, but just Chocolate City, just black people propping up America, running the Government Accountability Office, running the Treasury Department, running the Social Security, so all these people who hate government can get their checks from the government. And I went to public school and private school. I've had early access to tech because of my mom's early tech experiences, and I was able to benefit from the powers to reshape a narrative through access to some of these new tools. My older sister Belinda was a journalist, so I got to see, by watching her 9 years ahead of me, try to shape people's perceptions of themselves and not just cover crime and devastation, but also other possibilities of how we see each other. And of course, I took all of that wisdom, all of that education, all these expensive degrees, and I went into stand-up comedy, which was the most natural path. Worked for The Onion, America's finest news source, for 5 years. Helped Trevor Noah relaunch The Daily Show in its first year, while I also did my own thing and wrote the book How to Be Black. And as you heard now, I host a TV show about our connection to nature. I'm writing with Puck, which is assessing power in a lot of these major centers of power in the world, and especially in the US. And I'm on this current project of interpreting the word citizen as a verb through a podcast and something more called How to Citizen. So we can dive into that later, but my goal and mission is to make the unpalatable more palatable, to occasionally sprinkle jokes into horrible truths, and to remind us of who we have yet to become.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bonin, give us a little sense of...
I'm not following that. So everybody, so people who know me, what's up, DC? How are you? Are you good? Are you good? Okay, it's early.
I was early for that.
So you really shouted at them.
Right, really.
I thought it was hacked.
I'm just the guy to the left of Baratunde, and but I will say, and then I'll jump into what we're doing. This man did change my life. So when he was at The Onion, one Super Bowl, he did this thing where every single time something happened, they had the funniest Twitter post. And so when I sat with him, you remember this?
Yeah.
And I said, how did you nail them all? He said, I wrote them 2 weeks before that. I just said, what's gonna happen? And I said, oh, okay. But that led to what we did on Oreo. It led to changing the way that I saw.
So where's my check, bro? Hold up. I didn't know that part of the story.
Call the government. I don't know. So yeah, Bonin Bow. Well, she rattled off some stuff in my career, so I won't do that. But recently, I was sitting in Miami with a young black entrepreneur named Travis, and he was telling me that all of these companies have made commitments to invest in black-owned media, but he wasn't eligible. So here's a guy who raised $70 million. He has 1.7 trillion messages. He's the largest messaging. If you send a sticker or gift from Venmo, it's one of his, black dude. But the reason why he wasn't eligible is because he wasn't 51% owned. So if you're venture, you're never gonna be 51% owned. So I said, this is crazy. Let's start looking at the marketplace. So we looked at the marketplace, and it turns out what you showed, which is interesting because between the last 50 years, before the last 20, the last 50, from the turn of the century, 50 years back, there were 500 black-owned newspapers. And those newspapers shaped the narrative for our community.
Yeah.
Today, you can count them on your hand, really, owned. And so when we saw that, it became appalling and dismal that less than 0.2% of media is black-owned, less than 0.5% is female-owned, and when you look at all the other ethnicities, you don't get much further than that. So, and this is not to say that those 99% of white-owned organizations are wrong. It's just that there's one thing to be in front of the camera, like we've always heard. There's another thing to be behind the camera. But there's another thing to own the camera, because the people who own the distribution pipes are those that greenlight the narratives that are shown to the world. And so we set out on a journey to try to transform equitable media ownership, and we built Group Black. And the idea was to invest in emerging black-owned media companies and hopefully shift and bring diverse voices truly into general market at scale. Today we have $700 million in advertising commitments from P&G, McDonald's, WPP, yada, yada, yada. But what I'm most proud of is that we have capital partners that have been on a journey with us. So our next acquisition announcement will hopefully make us the 5th largest media company, period, in the world, but also the largest Black-owned media company in history. We started off with 6, thanks. Yeah, we started,
Do you want to make that announcement here?
no,
So, Paul,
no, because I don't want my partners to fire me. Although I don't know if that's possible since I own it too. But anyway, whatever, we'll figure it out. We started off with 6 companies, and as in the collective, so we're the largest Black-owned media collective, and now today we're on the journey. We're over 200. We should be 500 by the end of the year, and we help small companies really do the 4 things that we learned that they need. They need scale. They need content creation. These are companies that, if you really think about it, if you just look at the venture world, diverse entrepreneurs, they don't get investment. So these guys have built these businesses on their back. They didn't have a chance to get to the size of BuzzFeed was because they couldn't get the underwriting that BuzzFeed got. So they need distribution, they need scale content creation, capital, but really they need access to the room. So we provide the funnel and allow for brands to spend and buy across a diverse ecosystem in a way that's never been done before. So that's kind of what I'm doing now.
Okay, the mission. Thank you, Bonin. Let's go to the big question emblazoned in PowerPoint before us, and so we'll.
First of all, that's the bigger question. Who does your PowerPoints? None of mine look that good.
I mean, the motion. Who did that give?
Never,
That's again, it's like that background wall at reception. It's just kind of sucking me in.
I will never reveal who does my PowerPoint ever. Okay, but let's start with that. I'm going to go to you, Baratunde. So do you think our history would be history if we'd had media equity since the 1800s?
We would, of course, still have history. Mm-hmm. There would be different heroes. Yeah. We would focus on different versions of crime. Mm-hmm. There is a crime beat that focuses on theft at scale, mm-hmm. That focuses on displacement, that focuses on a ridiculous amount of dehumanization. There's a version of our history where media tells, for example, white people that it's okay. You're gonna be okay. You don't have to be so afraid. A lot of the stories that get us emotionally engaged are ones that provoke fear and push certain emotional buttons because they're easier to reach. But there are other buttons within all of us. And so I think of a different history and a different narrative, not just as can we have more women storytellers or more Black storytellers. Can we have a story that reaches deeper into what we know we're capable of and gets beyond the surface? I think a lot of the history of media right now is real transactional stuff. You want sex? Drink this beer. Here's sex. Okay, cool. You want to feel whole, have a different relationship with nature and the planet. Where's that story? And because it takes a little bit more effort, most people making stories don't bother to pursue it. But the return on investment on that is so much higher than a series of extractive transactions, which makes our planet unlivable. And then stories are worthless. So I want everything that is implied in this question in terms of distribution of dollars and ownership, but I also want the definition of equity to go to a deeper need that we can meet with the stories that we tell each other.
Bonin, what do you think?
Yeah, I think what he said. I think what he brings up is a good point, which is the reality of this. And so we look at the world that just because we're Black owned doesn't mean that we're Black targeted. Yeah. So if Viacom can own BET, we're going to own NBC. And part of the reason why is because we see a world, we've termed it the inclusion age, where we don't have to have these conversations, where it just is. Mm-hmm. But the only way for that to happen is that we have to show the world what that looks like. And you talked about female heroines, and so it's interesting, I had a conversation years ago with Rashma from Girls Who Code, and we were working on Swedish Fish, and I said, if I could do anything for you, what can I do? She said, make content that show women as scientists. Make content that show women, as mathematicians. Yeah. She said the challenge, if you go back to Atari, when the Atari first came out, it was 50% women who played it, 50 girls, 50% boys. Then we started showing gamers as a specific type, and women with dolls instead. Lo and behold, guess what gaming did? It started logic and mathematician. Now we ask ourselves why we have a STEM issue. And the reason why we have a STEM issue in terms of gender is because we don't show those things. And I one in a story. So seeing it, you can be it. We've always heard that. 2 stories. So my current, so there's 3 founders, me, Travis, and Richard Dennis. So Rich, he owned the largest natural beauty business. I met him, I was brought in by Bain Capital. They introduced me to him. And basically I came in, he said, come back. I had quit, I was out. Never doing this again. I'm out of the game, guys. And then I walk into this Black-owned, 200 million. I'd never seen anything like this in my life. And people talk about unicorns, like this was a dragon. Like a unicorn's a horse with a thing on it. This is like mythical. I've never, and it changed my whole perspective. When we took that business from 200 to 300, we sold it to Unilever for a little under $1 billion. 12 months later, he became the 12th Black billionaire, and really an icon. And I, for myself, in terms of what I'd never seen that. And then the last piece, and so that. Seeing it changes, and I had been in all the rooms, you know what I mean? But I had never seen that. And that just changed my perspective on what was truly possible. And then the last piece to that is I was in Dallas, and some guy stopped me and it was when Obama was running, and he was basically trying to tell me why Obama sucked. And I said, look, dude, I said, and we're at the bar, so first of all, well, can I just drink this scotch? Like, I'm really kind of focused on this right now. But I said, it doesn't matter whether he's good or bad, that's not the point. The point is that my kid can wake up in a world where they can see themselves being able to accomplish that. And that's the whole piece. So do I know if media, if it was different, if equity would be different? I'm sure history would be different, but I think the bigger thing is that we would have more narratives that show society what a balanced world should look like. And that's, I think, what's missing from me today, whether it is the power and beauty of being connected to the earth, whether it is stories that show women, whether it is, but to your point, it's transactional. It's a few guys trying to sell a few things and create an industry versus shape a society. Go ahead, sorry.
I just want to give you credit on not a unicorn, but a dragon. Right. That's like a real powerful visual metaphor, and I'm still thinking about it.
Thank you.
There's
You're still thinking about the lobby too.
Yeah, I am, because it's
I'm on the same,
in my head.
I'm on the same level.
I'm trying to really express the title of this gathering, and provoke. And so I remember doing some supportive work around criminal justice reform. And in the early days, we thought, okay, we just need more Black cops.
Right.
And then those cops won't brutalize Black people the way white cops have done. We just need more women in office, and that will just change American policies. No. It won't. I mean, we had an 80s rap song about Black cops, like they can be worse, to try to prove that they are so much a part of the system that they'll be even more brutal. It becomes a fraternal, testosterone-driven, like I'm more manly than you, which isn't just a race thing, it's also gender stuff and toxic stuff thrown up in there. So the deeper opportunity and much harder challenge is, okay, we have representation, but media equity has to be partly to your point about ownership and not just in the room, but like owning the table and leasing chairs. But then also, okay, what are the terms of those leases? And what is the business that we're trying to accelerate with these different participants and different demographics in the first place?
Yeah, that was going to lead into my next question. Which is
You're welcome.
It is the barriers, because you're right? A lot of talk about role modeling. You can't be it if you can't see it. All of those things are part of the vernacular now. But it feels like what's the barrier? I mean, you say why not more dragons? I mean,
the barrier is look. So the barrier is that we have to encourage and showcase and role model the behavior that we want, and we have to go after that's why I'm saying, like, our sights are not set on being a Black-owned media company. Our sights are set on being one of the NBCs of this generation. And somebody asked me, they said, well, what's the exit strategy? I said, I'm never exiting. I'm going to create this for generations. And so I think it's really about making sure that we set. It's interesting because I came down here for CBC, and you have conversations with.
Congressional Black Caucus.
Sorry, Congressional.
We have to translate. There's a lot of people not in the room as well.
Right. I think we're in D.C., man.
Yeah.
No.
But it's a whole global, you know what I'm saying? Like, that could be the Canadian
even
Broadcasting
more important.
Corporation.
Right.
What are they doing in
This would've
D.C.?
been weird.
Is it an invasion? If so, please bring the health care with you.
Right.
I welcome my Canadian overlords.
Oh, God.
I love Sarah. They're nice people.
They are they are, but we know what they're all about. So, and I was having a conversation with, and it was an older generation person, and the mindset was that we have to ask for the right to be at the table, and our mindset is that we're bringing the table. To your point,
Yeah.
you have to ask for the right to be at our table, and I think that that's a big part of what some of the. But it's the sad thing is time. Oh, sorry, somebody needs a.
Oh, sorry.
You broke your microphone. So anyway, I don't know where all that was going, but I think I answered a little
All
bit.
right, let's switch and talk a little bit about media spend. So media spend is supposed to hit a record high this year. Yeah, I'm going to go to Bon and well observed.
You don't like media spend?
No, I could just make up some numbers, but you're much more in that industry. I'm like, spend your media money with me. I don't know, that's all I gotta say.
Yeah, no. You should look for this. $322 billion this year. That's
That'll
a
work.
lot. Less than 1% of that media investment is going to Black-owned media. So what? And I know, Bon, and that that's part of your mission. So where are we on that, and what needs to change?
It's having done this for 14 months now, it's so complicated. No. The challenge is, so the reality, our best calculation is that from the pledges that have been made, there's $25 billion in pledges, and maybe there's $1 billion in available inventory. So it's a 25x differential. Very rarely you find a market like that. But the big challenge is that there's no scale and there's no ability to currently grow. So that's kind of what our component is. And then you have the other challenge, which is, so for you guys to know, when I was at Mondelez, I ran all of our media buying. I was chief media and e-commerce officer, and we spent about $4 billion around the globe. So the tough thing is when you have to deploy that kind of capital, people just want to do it in one shot. Nobody wants to spend time. So we have 500 members, no other company will go around each 500. But the other challenge there is that, so I started buying TV. You know what's crazy about television? Television will come in and say, here's the bad news, ratings are down. Here's the good news, you get to pay more money. You're like, what? Premium. And so here you have a very scarce inventory, but yet the market wants to pressure them to even take less than their competitive counterparts. So you're dealing with that whole piece, which is, it's an unfair pricing situation and scenario out there, which we face all the time. The other challenge you have is that right now, what's happening in the world is, as a black media owner, the moment you walk in the door, and this has never happened to me in my career, but there's other stories which we can tell. But the moment you walk in the door, they're like, oh, talk to the multicultural buyer. You're like, but wait a second. We also represent the largest airport network, so why do I need to talk to the multicultural buyer? And it's just like a binary. You're black. This is the only thing. You can only target black people, and that whole mindset is crazy. The other crazy mindset, and this is the last piece, is that when I wanted to change into 10% spending on mobile, that was when the year of mobile, which was like a decade of saying the year of mobile, right?
I can't remember when was that?
I don't know.
Yeah,
it was mostly.
It was a while ago.
Mostly the 2000s. Still might be. I focused on getting there. It was hard work. I focused on getting it because I wanted to be the first in any of the CPGs to say, I did it, I'm better, you lose. But
Very mature.
that's how I roll. That's my management style.
Yeah.
And yet, I'm very surprised that there are very few that are that laser focused on getting to the goal. And my concern is that what's going to happen is they're going to say what they've always said. Well, there was not enough qualified women. Oh, there was not enough qualified black-owned media companies to get there. We tried, and I'm surprised that there's nobody who is not just committing, but is being super committed and actually getting it done. So that's kind of the state. We're helping, and I'm working, and I call my friends all the time. And I had one last thing, and I'm shutting for real. And this is the other thing. Somebody said to me, a long-standing friend, like somebody I've known 20 years, they said, oh, we saw you reached out around Group Black. I want to meet with you. First of all, I was like, I didn't reach out. Somebody used my email, but okay, fine. And they go, well, we just want to make sure that it's going to make business sense and it's not charity. And I'm just like, dude, you think I would charity? Do you know who I am? Like, so that's kind of where the state is. I think we're going to get there because I think there are enough people who do want to see it happen, but I'm just surprised that we're not getting there faster. That's my personal opinion.
I think for all of us, who work on clients, who have clients, it's an important message, right? And that message around committing versus being committed, because that's what it's going to take,
right.
I think, to change the equation. Baratunde, I'm going over to you to talk about your much beloved TED Talk. Oh. MSNBC said best TED Talk ever.
We've got 15 minutes. Why don't you just do
in the whole world? Right. I was going to say, could you recreate it? No, I'm not going to do that, Bonin. But it did seem to be catalytic. I mean, maybe for you, but I think for others too. So what was the impact that it had? And what did you think about it at the time?
I first want to acknowledge the impact of your boots. They're tremendous.
Thank you.
And the spider, wear this brooch, this is dope. Yes, let's clap. That is that's superhero shit.
There's a lot of impact
That's great.
going on here. Yeah.
So my TED Talk is titled How to Deconstruct Racism One Headline at a Time. It was born of the experience of reading traumatic headlines initially around murder of black people by folks sworn to protect and serve in terms of law enforcement, which then precipitated a new phenomenon moving upstream of those events to white people calling the cops on black people for doing nothing other than living and daring to breathe. And so having the repetition of those headlines, the high school, English early writer in me saw the grammar of it. Mm-hmm. And there was a pattern to that story. White person calls cops on black person for opening their car door, for checking out real estate, for walking into their own business, for sleeping on a park bench, for studying in the library, et cetera, et cetera. So flipping that around, it started as a game, literally. What if we changed these variables around and scrambled it? How would that make us feel? And that led to two other sets of insights, which is we can change this, and that this is not just about black-white binary stuff, which is where I feel comfortable talking, but there's also a lot of other dimensions of power imbalances and abuses of that power where we can change that narrative. So yes, it was catalytic for me because I felt like I actually learned something in the process of putting that talk together. For others, the feedback I've gotten is that this was a really simple and useful tool to approach problems and to approach abuses of power. And what if instead of in the meeting abusing your employee, you mentored them? And what is the threat? And I come back to something I opened with. I think if I'm faced with a perceived loss of power, it is in my natural response mechanism to cling to that, to defend that, to fear any change to that. So no one's a monster intrinsically, but we can behave monstrously. And so we do need a new story, not just to abuse less, but to find out for ourselves that we can be more even if we have less in the previous version of the system. So a man who fears pay equity because a woman's gonna get more money or as much money as him, he's gonna interpret that as I'm getting less money now because she's getting more. Well, only if you see the world in a zero-sum way. You could also see yourself in relationship and recognize your household has more money, your neighborhood has more money, your office has more money, and you can collaboratively deploy that capital toward dragon type stuff that Bonin's doing. But we also don't hear those stories. So I think there's a valid complaint in the system about who gets to tell the story. Yeah. But I keep coming back to what is the story that we're telling, and we need to not just focus on the oppressed, the liberation of the oppressed, but the liberation of the oppressor as well. Because if we don't move that, if men don't see ourselves as benefiting from gender equity, then we will block it, because that is the story we have been told for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so we are captive as well. And that need to see our freedom tied up in our partner's freedom.
And this is a gathering of storytellers,
Yeah.
professional storytellers.
So just do that
So
and fund that.
There is an opportunity to,
Yeah.
And just fix the world.
here.
It's simple. You know?
It's
But you know, so storytelling. So there's two pieces. My dad, who unfortunately passed, but was a photographer for 60 years, and he shot black women when nobody would. Nobody professional, would. He did, what's her face, Jesus Christ, first cover of Vogue. I'll think of it in a minute. First black woman on the cover of Vogue. He shot jazz. He shot black theater, and we had a huge collection of black theater. So we spent, but he shot street scenes. His real art, so we just digitized, while he was still alive, we digitized 500,000 photographs that had never been digitized or archived. A lot of stuff that I had never seen in my life. It was just like sitting in his house. I was like, dude, we should probably not have it just sitting in your house. So as I started trying to take his collection out, unfortunately, COVID hit and we couldn't do what we had planned. As I start taking his collection out, there's a belief system that the black art should represent the struggle. Mm-hmm. And I'm telling people, that's not my dad was trying to be a photographer beyond having to represent the struggle. And I look at what, and I got lucky, we did something up against Basquiat work with him. And there was a quote that Basquiat had when they said, hey, what's it like to be a black painter? He said, well, I also paint yellow, I also paint purple. Right? And so in my mind, I'm like, to your point, we also have to be able to tell the stories that are not the stories about, hey guys, here's our oppression, here's the thing. Like that's not, this is about excellence and everybody being able to do. And then the other piece you said, because I listened to This American Life, I've listened to every single one of them. I don't even know how many times. That's all I do. And I was listening to one that I completely had forgotten about, and the story is crazy. So this woman, she was dating this guy. It was not for that long, but she ends up, they're at his house. She ends up getting up, sleepwalking, right, naked, and ends up somewhere in this bottom of the building in the stairwell. And she comes to wake, and she's like, what am I doing here? Then she realizes, oh my God. But she doesn't remember what apartment he lives in. So now she's walking around and trying to figure out, and she's afraid to knock on the wrong door. She does it. So she knocks on the door and runs behind runs behind the door to the stairwell to see who comes out. She's waking up neighbors. So she's like, okay, she's going now systematically floor by floor. It's like 5-floor building. She goes, oh, okay, the mailbox. Runs downstairs and realizes the mailbox, there's glass to the outside, so she can't go into the mailbox. She goes back and tries each door, at seeing if one of them was open, because maybe it was left open. She finally hears these voices, and it sounds like they're having a party. So she just goes, okay. She knocks on the door, and she runs behind the stairwell thing again, and a woman comes out, and she's like, psst. And she tells this woman, explains, the woman's like, okay, don't worry about it, I'll get you some clothes, come in. So she comes in, and it's like a party, and there's like 8 people. She dives behind the couch, and then she gives her sweatpants, and she still can't figure out where this person lives, so the lady's like, don't worry, just sleep on the couch here. So she sleeps on the couch here. Meanwhile, the guy who she was with woke up in the middle of the night. She was gone. Her phone was there, her clothes were there. And so he's looking like in the bathroom, in the, he said, I opened the oven, I didn't understand, right? And think about this, mind blowing. So then the story took the most interesting twist, because he's so nervous now. He calls the cops, because he's like, what happened to her? So the cops come and they look at him, and she was British, he was black. And they basically said, you must have done something to her. So they automatically blamed him. She's calling her phone. The cop answers like, who is this? And she gets downstairs, and the cops are literally like, they were interrogating this guy as if and when the story took that turn, I was just like, that showcases exactly what you were talking about, which is the unseen challenges, even whether it's headlines or whether it's our actual life, that the way the world positions us, you know? And so, anyway, so I thought it was fascinating.
I think it did make the point. I wasn't expecting the naked sleepwalking story.
Me either.
I wasn't expecting.
I
But you know. All right, one last question for you, Bonin, before I ask you both another big question. You know, the new Black Panther movie is coming out.
Yep.
We talk a lot
Yep.
About the movie as being terrific, and it made, I think, the last one 1.3, 1.6 billion, something like that. And a lot of times we talk about. You know, moral imperatives, and we talk about business imperatives. Should we be talking more about a business imperative here?
100%. I mean, Black Panther 2 is probably going to be bigger.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think what they did was they said, look, and it makes perfect sense. You have a whole group of people who, the only time where you find growth, and this is what I believe, and that's my focus my whole career on this, the only time you find growth is in underserved communities and underinvested opportunities. That's where growth comes from. And when you think about it, like I was speaking to Reckitt, oh sure, I shouldn't have said that, sorry. I was speaking at a company, and somebody asked, you know, that same question, is this a bit, I said, yeah, I said, look, if you get on a plane right now and you go to Miami, you will be at the Latin Grammys. Look at how few brands are actually on the masthead. There's no way you can't tell me that you can't go and make impact in that community and drive business growth. I mean, it's just sitting right, it's literally, these are layups, they're sitting right there. And the same thing exists in the Black community, and we're seeing it, Black Panther and Encantos. Encantos wasn't just a big film, they went to all the toy manufacturers and said, hey, we want to make toys, because it was the largest, most expansive palette. And the toy manufacturers came back and said, we don't even have those colored plastics. So they had to change their entire supply chain. But then, but now think about it, a little girl is going in and seeing somebody who looks like her, sales are off the roof, you know what I mean? And so it is more than anything, this is the business growth area.
So I know that conversations like this are had frequently, and you both participate in them. Baratunde, what bugs you about it? Does it irritate you to have this conversation again and again?
I just want to acknowledge Jen Psaki's in the building.
Right.
I saw her, and she's a hero, so thank you for your service, Jen. I'm just going to go have a crush off stage in a second now. What bugs me about this conversation? There are baked-in assumptions that we don't challenge. One assumption is that power is something that certain people have that others don't, and that is a charitable act to grant access to the other. And so we should help out these communities and throw some spend at them to their benefit, still not recognizing that it's to our benefit, all of us, whoever the us is in the us versus them dynamic, we need a we dynamic. I also think maybe the biggest unchallenged assumption is about growth and about what the project of kind of capitalism really is about, and sales and promotion of what. And I think I saw a speaker years ago, Alnor Lada, first hit me into this basic idea, like infinite growth in biology is cancer, and it destroys the host. Infinite growth in economics is better share price and more riches for those who happen to hold shares. But we see in the response of the planet, our host, it is as unsustainable as a malignant tumor. And so how do we create a whole different set of incentives that value reuse, that value regeneration and restoration, that take and level up even on the success of a Black Panther or an Encanto and say, okay, cool, so now we're making money off of these traditional stories. Yeah. How do we make sure the people whose stories we're monetizing get paid? Yeah. Not just the studio that put the film out. Otherwise, we're repeating the extraction. It's a literal metaphorical extraction rather than a tangible mineral extraction, but it leads to the same unsustainable, imbalanced existence. So that deeper assumption about where value lies, who has power, and what we're actually aspiring to, we need to challenge that. Otherwise, we certainly will pat ourselves on the back a few years from now for some nudges and percentages of distribution of whatever resource we're talking about, whether it's jobs or ad spend. Every conference has the same, VC, it's all the same conversation. So we have to change the terms of the conversation at a lower level.
I think that's a huge and important point. Yeah. And I did want to end. I mean, we've spoken a lot about the Black experience. I mean, the notion of media equity goes far beyond that, right?
Yeah.
It relates to the Latinx community, the Asian community, the LGBTQ plus community, and gender. I mean, and you can see some data points up here. Again, this is, as we said, an audience of storytellers, story makers, people who counsel clients. Bonin or Baratunde, anything that you think, 3 things this group of people can do.
I'll try to keep it super short. I have a whole podcast you should really check out.
So, podcast 1.
It's called How to Citizen, and I'll just tell you how we define it, because I think it's an applicable framework for any business. Citizen as a verb, show up and participate in whatever community you're a part of. Invest in relationships, not just transactions, with yourself, with others, and with the planet around you, seeing yourself as part of nature, not apart from nature. Understanding power, it's not a dirty word, it's just a way to get people to do what you would have them do. And there's a lot of different levers we can pull to exert that power. And do all this to benefit the collective self, not just the individual self. And so this isolationist thinking, not from a national policy, foreign policy perspective, but from an individualistic perspective, will be our doom. But seeing the collective version of selfishness can be our redemption and our salvation. So in your organizations, in whatever form of decision-making you have authority, do a little power inventory. Where do I exert influence? What collective self-interest am I serving? What relationship could I invest in? And how can I show up? Not necessarily to lead or say shit, but just to be present and be willing to learn as well.
Thank you. No, that's great. Bonin, any last words?
I mean, I can't follow that. It's just, I think all the stuff he said, I think the only having, this is an industry that I grew up with, and industry. Oh, there's Ed. I just saw Ed. We just had a Rudderfin reunion, and it was great to see people I've worked with 25 years ago. They're all still young though, and I think for this industry specifically is to make sure that we're helping companies truly understand the nature of what they say in the marketplace around what their plans are to do. And then what we know from organizations is that whatever, and I know this is going to sound weird, but whatever's measured or whatever we track actually gets accomplished. And so my biggest concern on these journeys are that just like when we wanted to turn companies green, we had sustainability reports. Like, where does the point where we actually look at who we are and how we are actually interacting with society as an organization, where do we begin to make sure that we hold ourselves accountable? And you guys have to tell the rest of the world the stories of these companies, because the companies that are not holding themselves accountable, that are not changing, I can assure you, will be left out. And so I just think there's a different conscience, and I also think the younger generation sees the world vastly different than we do, and they're going to start making the change if we don't do it before. So that's it.
So yep, I thank you so much, Baratunde.
Thank
you,
Gail.
Bonin. Thanks all of you and all of you listening virtually. I truly believe in the power of this industry and in all the thinking that all of you do, and the exponential power that we have with our clients. And I do believe we can make change happen. So thank you.
Thanks, y'all.